Now, we all know that, our favourites, would they be Neil Young, Paul McCartney, Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, The Who, the Rolling Stones, Radiohead, all fantastic artists, amazingly talented, brought so much kind of amazing music to the world. But they've all got at least one album that is an absolute stinker. And I'm going to go through 10 albums that I think are absolutely they're just crap, but they're done by amazing artists and songwriters. And so I'm going to kick it off with a favourite of mine. Now, I don't own all of these albums anymore, but at one point in time, I have owned these albums, and I've either given or thrown them away. But a few here I still actually possess, believe it or not. And the first one is a favourite of mine, a favourite artist of mine. It is, of course, Elvis Costello and the Attractions. And this is their album, or his album, Goodbye Cruel World, from 1984, I'm going to say. This came out. The backstory of this is Elvis was on the verge of bankruptcy. He was recording this album in the same studio as Relax was being made by Frankie Goes to Hollywood. And in the time it took them to do one song, he did a whole album, and then he buggered off on tour because he had to make some money because of this impending bankruptcy. He left the producers to it, and when he came back off the tour, this is what he was left with. And he heard it, and he was horrified. It's covered in the nasty DX7 keyboard, and the production is very nasty. It's very dated. Now, you could blame the production. You could blame some of the arrangements and the instrumentation, but what's quite poor about this album really is the songwriting. Elvis Costello, a wonderful songwriter, but yes, very much below par on this album, I think. Songs like Only Flame in Town, they could have worked if he'd have done them in an acoustic fashion, but that wouldn't have really worked in the mid-80s, I don't think. Home Truth, Room with No Number, they're just very kind of maudlin and too gloomy. Inch by Inch, it works acoustic. I've heard him play that acoustically. Worthless Thing, I actually do like that tune. But again, the production just covers up the fact that there's a good song trying to get out there. And then side B opens up with I Want to Be Loved, which is a cover of an old soul classic, which is not a bad song, but again, it's just covered in this nasty production. And then as it goes on, the songs get kind of worse and worse, really. So this is a terrible album by what I consider to be a great artist. That's my first one. Next up is an album I don't own anymore, so I'll pop it on the screen there, either side. And it is Press to Play by Paul McCartney. Now, I bought this album when I was younger, and my dad encouraged me to get into the Beatles. And when I came home with a Paul McCartney record, the look on his face, he was so disappointed in me. He was like, son, what have you done? Stay away from the solo records. And he was right, because this album is absolutely piss poor. McCartney had a bit of a break from recording. His previous album, Give My Regards to Broad Street, had been a flop. And even though it had Dave Gilmour on that album, it was a commercial and critical flop. And so he had a bit of time to, come to terms with that. And he put a band together and the musicians, and he got Phil Collins, and he got Hugh Padgham, who produced Genesis and The Police and XTC, some of my favourite music. And he made this album, Press to Play, and it is terrible. Now, we can blame the production, we can blame the 80s, mid-80s kind of soundscapes and things like that. But again, what is really poor about this album is the songwriting. At times there's a little hook happens, something kind of you think he's building, and then it goes absolutely nowhere. These songs just kind of, they happen and you don't even know you've listened to them. They're very bland. There's no real hook. Lyrically, they're pretty bereft, I think. And the whole thing just falls flat. And it's easily McCartney's worst album. And that is Press to Play by Paul McCartney. The next one up is another Beatles, ex-Beatles solo album, should we say. And it is Somewhere in England by George Harrison. Again, I used to own this album, and I think I sold it or gave it away or something. But this is another very disappointing album. This came out following the death of John Lennon, and there was a lot of anticipation for more Beatles product. The lead single, all those years ago, was very promising. It had Ringo and Paul and Linda on there, produced by George Martin, and it was a catchy song. And then when the album came out, it just completely fell flat, and I can see why. Because when I first heard this, being a massive Beatles and George Harrison fan, I was very, very disappointed. This first song, Blood from a Clone, is about George's frustration with record companies, and I can understand their frustration, to be honest. I'm on the record company's side on this one, because the songwriting is way below par. Production's not too bad. I think Ray Cooper had some hand in that as well. And the playing and arrangements, they're pretty decent. He's got some top-notch players on here, but it's the songwriting again. Songs like Save the World, they're really kind of, he's trying to shoehorn an ecological song in there, and it doesn't really work. Unconsciousness Blues is just horrible. It's got this kind of guitar picking part to it that really, the sound of it just kind of grates, really. And the whole thing is just a bit of a disappointment, and at times a bit of a mess, to be honest. So George Harrison, fantastic musician in my eyes, written some absolutely outstanding songs, but this album is pretty poor. The next one I have is an album I still own, and it is Tormato by the band Yes. I'm a big Yes fan. These guys, they come out with, probably the greatest prog rock album ever, which was Close to the Edge. Also Fragile, the Yes album, Relayer. These are classic albums, going for the one. And then after going for the one, they produced this album. Now, I think they'd fallen out over who was going to produce the album. So their producer and kind of engineer, Eddie Offord, he walked away from the sessions and left them to it. And yeah, they should have just left it there, but they persevered on and produced this album under duress. I think it was released, but the whole thing is just, it starts off quite promising. Future Times, Rejoice is quite nice. Then it goes into Don't Kill the Whale, which again is another one of those ecological songs that really just doesn't work for me. Steve Howe's guitar playing, for some reason, I love Steve Howe's playing, but on this song, it just grates. He's kind of doing these kind of half bends, and they really don't work. It sound like slightly out of tune to me, and it's really horrible. There's a song where John Anderson gets his son to do a little bit of narration and sing it on, and his young son at the time. And again, that's just really syrupy and sickly and really doesn't work for me. There's some promise with songs like On the Silent Wings of Freedom. They start quite promising, and then it builds and builds and then goes nowhere and just kind of drifts away. So I think they kind of run out of ideas, or maybe they just couldn't get along and, well enough to form good ideas, or at least, be in the same room at the same time sometimes. So this is easily classic Yes. It's easily the worst album from that period. And a bit of a backstory about the cover there. There's a tomato being thrown at it because Rick Wakeman was so upset with the album design, which is meant to be called Yes Tor, as in Yes Hill. Old English word for hill is tor, and they would call it Yes Tor. He got so upset with the cover, he threw a rotten tomato at it, but that was the only kind of copy they had of the album cover. So there it is, Tormato. Terrible album, terrible title as well. Next on my list, another album I don't own, thankfully, and it is It's Hard by The Who. Everybody knows this is The Who's worst album. The Who produced some incredible albums. Tommy, Who's Next, Quadrophenia, Who by Numbers is okay. And then after Who Are You, Keith Moon dies, and then they released the album with Kenny Jones, Face Dances, which I actually quite like. I know it's not their best work, but it's a solid album. There's some decent songs on there and some decent playing. And then It's Hard comes out, and I think by this time, Pete Townsend had used up all his best songs on his solo album, Empty Glass, which actually is a very good album, I think. And whatever was left over, what ideas were left over, he used for this album, It's Hard. So In terms of performance, Roger Daltrey's voice is incredible. At this point, he's a great singer. The band are sounding great. They're playing great, but they're just relying on the same old tropes, really. Power chords and the kind of similar things that they did before, big crashing guitar sounds and things like that. John Entwistle's bass isn't as prominent as it should be, and it has been on previous albums to this. And Kenny Jones is a great drummer, solid drummer. I'm not sure his music always suited The Who, but he did a good job, and he was a good, he is a good solid drummer. But what's really poor about this is the songwriting. Things like Athena, Eminence Front, Man is a Man, I've Seen No War. They just sound a little bit forced, really. And I think Pete Townsend had lost interest. He'd lost interest in The Who. He was more interested in getting drunk, maybe. And they were a spent force by this time, I think, certainly in a creative sense. So, it's hard. Great, fantastic band, The Who, but this is a piss poor album. Next on my list is one of my favourite songwriters of all time. Probably, for me, one of the greatest songwriters of all time, if not the greatest songwriter of all time, and it is Joni Mitchell, and it is her album Dog Eat Dog from, I think this came out about 1985. She changed direction a little bit in the early 80s. She started working with her husband at the time, Larry Klein, bassist and record producer, wonderful musician, and has produced some great albums over the years. And they did an album together called Wild Things Run Fast. Now, that kind of was a soft rock, kind of more straight ahead rock pop kind of affair. And they kind of made it work. Songs like Chinese Cafe and I Dream of Flat Tires, they really did work. And the song Love is on there. It's beautiful. It wasn't really, for me, it wasn't Stellar Joni. It was kind of like her tipping a toe into something else, and it didn't really work for me, moving away from the jazz and the folkiness that she'd done before. But she proved she could do that with Wild Things Run Fast. But with Dog Eat Dog, it's way too much Larry Klein. It's too much keyboards, heavy drum production. Joni's not playing any guitar. She's playing synthesizers and keyboards and things, which, she's a wonderful piano player, but there's no real character, no real Joni characteristics in this album. And I just think the songs are very poor. They're not very good songs. I mean, she could write anything I could ever come up with, that's for sure. But this album is poor from a standpoint of production and the songwriting, obviously. And there seems to be a lot of 80s albums in this list, I've noticed, which is funny. But there we go. The next one up is an album by my favourite musician of all time. And it's an album by Jack Bruce of the band Cream. And this album is called Automatic. Jack Bruce, obviously, was responsible for most of the songwriting and singing in the band Cream, producing songs like I Feel Free, Sunshine of Your Love, White Room, Politician. One of the most influential bassists ever, fantastic musician, fantastic songwriter, incredible singer. His early solo albums such as Songs for Taylor, Harmony Row, Out of the Storm are incredible. His work with Frank Zappa and John McLaughlin and Lou Reed, he's done just about everything. But then in the early 80s, someone gave him a Fairlight keyboard and a recording contract, and he made this album called Automatic for a German label called Interchord, I do believe they're called, yes. Now, this album is just Jack Bruce with a drum machine and the keyboards, a little bit of bass playing, but you don't get classic Jack Bruce bass playing on here. That is out of the window. It's all keyboards and drums, the instrumentation. And it's the production that really lets this down. The drums are very thin, very cheap. It sounds like it was recorded in someone's bedroom in the 90s or something. Nasty drum machine sound, and the keyboards are really shrill and harsh. Not very warm sounding album at all. What I will say though is Jack's voice is incredible, But Jack's voice was always incredible on everything he did. It doesn't matter who he sang with, what he was doing, his own stuff or with other people, his voice was always incredible and beautiful. And there are a few good songs on here. Particularly, there's a song called Encore, which was released on another album called The Best Is Still to Come. And that is an incredible song. So I love it for that song only. But and Automatic Pilot is quite good as well. It's kind of a bluesy thing he does on the harmonica, which is strange because it doesn't really sit with the rest of the album. And the rest of the album, things like A Boogie, Uptown Breakdown, Traveling Child, they're just not very good songs. It's not Jack he's not firing on all 4 cylinders here. He's firing on a 1 cylinder really in terms of composition. So this great artist, poor album. Sorry, Jack. Next up, we have another fantastic artist, fantastic band. And that is a band called The Band. Now, The Band started life as, they started life as a bar band touring with Ronnie Hawkins, and then they became kind of known playing for Bob Dylan. They played on the Basement Tapes, and then they released Music from Big Pink in 1967. And their second album, which is just called the Brown Album, is a fantastic record, kind of more or less inventing Americana, even though they're mostly Canadian. And then they did an album called Stage Fright. And then for me, it's a gradual decline. They did an album called Cahoots, Moondog Matinee. I forget what other albums they had out at that time. But it's, as it goes on, it gets worse and worse and worse. And then their final album, the final few albums get just dip off for me in terms of songwriting, in terms of production, and I think there's lots of drugs involved. Robbie Robertson, who was the main songwriter, he's losing interest or losing ideas maybe. He wanted to go in a different direction, and it wasn't really working. And I think each album after 1970 just gradually got worse. And the very last one they released was an album called Islands. And now this was done under contractual obligation. They had one album to fulfill for their contract, and it was a bunch of outtakes and other little things that they'd been working on. And this is just a poor album. It's a band that has just completely lost focus, lost interest, probably struggling to be in the same room at the same time. They're probably drinking and partying way too much. And yeah, the songs are just not there. Rick Danko's voice is great as always, as is Levon Helms and Richard Manuel, but some of the instrumentation is just a bit lazy and a bit sloppy, and it's the songs really that let it down. And some of the keyboard work from Garth Hudson is really quite naff. The keyboard sounds, he's a wonderful musician, but the keyboard sounds are naff. They're pretty horrible. So I'm going to put Islands in there. Great band, poor album. Next up, a musical genius, this man is, and it is, of course, Stevie Wonder. Think of the music he's created and made. I mean, Inner Visions, Talking Book, Songs in the Key of Life, Hotter Than July. They're just incredible albums. Music of My Mind, I love them. But then in the 80s, in about 1987, 88, he released an album called Characters. And this album is so poor. It's got Quincy Jones producing it. He's got Michael Jackson duetting on there. He's Nathan Watts on the bass. It should all be there, but it just isn't. A production, typical 80s, overproduced, nastiness, horrible drum sound, way too many keyboards, highly processed guitars, very thin bass. But what's really kind of bad is the songwriting, really. The songwriting is so poor. The first song he starts singing about, everything will be fine, different characters having problems with drugs, with being single parents. But if they just pray to God, they'll be fine. And it just comes across as evangelical and preachy, and it's just not a good album. It is very, very poor. And if you see it you'll probably see it for like £1 in bargain bins somewhere, and it's a reason for that, because it's awful. So Stevie Wonder, sorry, you are a genius, but that album is poor. And brings me on to the final album. Now, this is going to upset some people out there, fans of this band. But it is, of course, Hot Space by Queen. Now, Queen are a legendary band. They're one of the greatest bands ever, aren't they? I played in a Queen tribute for a couple of years, and I know, I've got inside kind of feelings about this and understanding about the music and how amazing these songs are that Queen made. But when they came out with Hot Space in the early 80s, probably, what was it, about 1982 they came out with this. This was, even at the time, it was seen as a disappointment. Now, it did include the song Under Pressure on there, which is a fantastic single, fantastic song. But the rest of the album is very poor. They're kind of their take on disco funk. It's very homoerotic, which I haven't got a problem with. But it's Freddie wanting to do his kind of dance music, kind of sexualized, kind of soul funk stuff. Songs like Staying Power, Body Talk, they don't work at all. Cool Cat, they are awful songs. Queen are not a funk soul band. They could do a little bit of it. They had the ability to play a little bit of it with Another One Bites Dust to be funky, but Roger Taylor's not a funk player. He's a four on the floor rock player, a very good four on the floor rock player, but that's what he does. Again, Brian May, great rock guitarist. He can pace a little bit of funky stuff, but through an entire album, no, it's a different discipline. And I remember when I was in the Queen tribute band, we decided to play Staying Power and Back Chat from this album. And someone shouted out from the audience, play some Queen, because no one knew it. No, Queen fans, they didn't care for it. It's just a bad album by a fantastic band. The songs are, they're iffy at best, and the production's very thin and weedy. Saving Grace, Freddie's voice, always fantastic. Brian May's guitar sound, always fantastic. But the rest of it is poor. So, fantastic band, fantastic artist, poor album. So, those are my 10 poor albums by fantastic artists. Let me know what you think in the comments. It'd be good to hear from you. I'm going to go now. All the usual stuff. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye. Bye.